Hello, I'm Marites Vitug and welcome to Rappler Talk. Today we are joined by Raul Pangalangan, a newly appointed judge of the International Criminal Court. Raul is the second Filipino to be appointed to the ICC, which is based in The Hague, Netherlands. Thank you, Raul, for spending time with us this morning and getting out of your busy schedule.
Well, it's my pleasure, Marites.
Actually, we wanted to know your story first. How did you campaign? This is a difficult post to attain. How did your campaign go? Maybe you can tell us more about it.
It was exhausting, Marites, way beyond what I expected.
How many people did you have to talk to, our countries and their representatives?
The judges are elected by all the member states of the court. These are states that have signed the Rome Statute. There are 123.
Okay. You didn't have to talk to all of them.
I did not get to talk to all of them, but I felt like I almost did. Mm-hmm. So I had to meet with either their ambassadors or their permanent representatives to the UN or to their legal advisors.
And what was your key message to them?
Well, first of all, the selection for the ICC is supposed to be determined by the qualifications of the candidate. So I had to make my own presentation of what I had to offer as a lawyer, as a law professor, as a Filipino law professor, and so I began by telling them that I actually took part in drafting the Rome Statute. I was one of the younger. I wasn't the youngest delegate of the Philippines, but I was one of the younger delegates to the drafting of the statute. I sat on the drafting committee, and for the next 10 years, I co-chaired the Philippine campaign to ratify. Mm-hmm. So it took us a long time to ratify. Not surprisingly, Marites, because let's face it, this is a court which will run after human rights violations. We have two rebellions that we have to deal with, and so there was some hesitation on the part of the various parts of the Philippine government.
It took how many years for the Philippines to ratify this, the Rome Statute, or the reservations were mainly because of the possibility that our leaders would be hauled to the ICC?
Not really. I won't say leaders, although the leaders are within the jurisdiction of the court. The jurisdiction will extend to the leaders and, of course, to the officers and to the uniformed personnel who are involved. But in fact, that's, I think, one advantage of the ICC, Marites. It focuses on individual criminal responsibility. In other words, the court will look not at the politics of the case. There is an incident, there is a victim, there are people who committed those offenses. It will look solely at that concrete incident. It will not ask, which party do you belong to, which flag does he carry, what uniform does he wear. It focuses solely on those who are guilty. So
let's first maybe try to differentiate the ICC from the International Court of Justice. The ICC says it deals with very specific crimes against humanity, heinous crimes, war crimes.
Crimes against humanity, yes.
How is it different from the International Court of Justice?
Yes. Okay. These are both international courts, both fully international, both standing permanent tribunals, both located at The Hague. The difference is that the ICJ deals with the responsibility of the state, and the ICC deals with the criminal responsibility of individuals. A concrete example is the Yugoslavia conflict, although it's not an ICC matter because it happened before the ICC was created. It was heard by another international criminal tribunal. This one, the ICTY, the Court for Yugoslavia. For the genocide which was committed there, that was heard by the ICJ because it was at the level of states fighting one another. But in the course of that conflict, there were individual, lots of crimes that were committed. So those individuals now will be charged before the
ICC.
well, at that time there was no ICC yet, so it was charged before a smaller tribunal, but involving international criminal jurisdiction. So today, now that the ICC has been created, it will be such cases will be heard by the ICC.
I think, Raul, you've come full circle. You were part of the drafting, and you lobbied for the ratification of the Rome Statute.
Yes.
Now you're part of the ICC. What perspective do you bring as a Filipino judge? Is this any different from what a judge from Jordan or from the UK will bring to the court?
I think what's unique for the Philippines is our history. You see, this is a court created specifically to end impunity. Correct. That people who commit abuses basically get away with it. And of course, we know the history of our country. We have seen impunity. We know the price we have paid. That we never had a closure on the Marcos years. And I think it is, I would say, like a scar on the collective, the collective mindset. And so I think a Filipino coming into an institution dedicated to ending impunity will come in with that unique perspective, the value of bringing, of defining exactly what was committed, imposing a penalty on it, and leaving a reliable legal record of what happened, in contrast to what we have faced in many situations in the past.
The ICC has been around for 13 years. Critics say that during this length of time, only 2 convictions have been made. Can you talk to us about the process of the ICC?
Yes. Well, the criticism is that it has been slow. And I think it can be explained because this is an international court which has to be very careful with its procedure and in respecting the human rights, the due process rights of the accused. So you can imagine that this is a court that will not take shortcuts. So the first investigation is done by the prosecutor. Herself, a respected prosecutor from Africa.
Just one?
Well, there's a chief prosecutor, and then, of course,
a team.
Well, of course, an entire office actually conducting investigations. And then that prosecutor makes the investigation. There's a whole process by which to trigger off an investigation. So it's triggered off. The prosecutor makes the investigation and decides to file a case. And then it is filed before the trial chambers of the court, and then there's of course the appeals chamber. So you can imagine that just like with any local proceeding, it goes through many stages, except that these are stages where all the safeguards have to be observed, and the effect is that it's not fast. Now the court has, I think, now adopted, it's been around for more than a decade, adopted many reforms to streamline the proceedings.
So do you feel like the Philippines, we can relate to this process because here in the Philippines we also have a very long time, it takes a long time for the courts to resolve cases, or maybe ours is a different case?
Well, I think it's a parallel dilemma. After the fall of Marcos, people felt that we should have all the safeguards of due process for the accused, and I think it's like a pendulum swinging. I think we have hit the one end of the pendulum where basically due process is endless process, walang katapusan, and so now I think we should go back to a point of equilibrium where we can balance the right of the accused to due process and the right of everyone to justice, and I think that is what the court is striving for. But Marites, on the question of slowness and cost, I think we must also not lose sight of the larger picture. There is a price tag to justice. That is for sure. But I pick it up from the metaphor on education. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. So we know that justice is expensive, but we also know the price we have paid as a nation for impunity for many human rights violations.
Yes, because as I mentioned to you earlier before the interview that you have a critic at the Forbes magazine who said ICC has spent $1 billion for only 2 convictions. Anyway, the other criticism is that these 2 convictions are from Africa, and all the charges so far filed against leaders of states are all from African states. Is there an African bias? A bias against Africa, rather?
No, there is no Africa bias. The prosecutor herself is from Africa. I think we should start from the facts, Marites. If you look at all the Asian cases pending before the court, majority of them were by self-referral, meaning the state saying, "Look, court, we have a problem here. Can you send over your prosecutors to investigate?" So it's not as if other countries are leading the charge to make the accusation. Many of them actually are by self-referral. That is the first. Also, I think we must also look at the roster of situations that have been referred to the court. The court has conducted investigations not just in Africa, and so I think it's just that it is not as public as the cases that have been actually
about the structure of the ICC. Is it like our Philippine Supreme Court where there are divisions, or are cases decided by all the justices, like in an en banc case?
There are matters which are referred to the en banc, which they call it the plenary.
The plenary.
And I have actually sat at a plenary sitting of the court. But yes, there are we call them the chambers.
The chambers.
There are different chambers to the court: the pre-trial chamber, the trial, and the appeals chamber.
Where will you be sitting?
That is a matter that I will have to leave to the president of the court. The president of the court is also a woman.
Yes,
so both the prosecutor and the president of the court are women. The 2 vice presidents are also women. Just so that you have the complete picture of both the gender balance in the court, also the regional balance. The president is from Argentina. So yes, that's a decision of the president.
And you will be serving the remaining years of Senator Santiago, who was the first to be
that is correct.
Appointed to the ICC.
Senator Santiago, my former professor at the UP College of Law, was elected to a 9-year term. That is the full term at the ICC. And she was unable to take up her seat and for health reasons. And so what is remaining now in her term is 6 years. And I will be there until 2021.
You mean it's a full-time? It's going to be a full-time work?
That is correct. Under the rules of the ICC, they initially allowed judges to serve part-time. Because let's face it, when it was newly established, there were not enough cases to be heard. But now it's been around for a while, so I, in contrast to the earlier judges, upon election was sworn in and was immediately called to serve full-time.
What I liked about the ICC nomination process for judges is that everything was transparent. I watched you interview on YouTube. I got your, the forms you had to fill up.
Yes.
On the internet. Are the hearings as well very transparent? Are they open to the public?
Okay. The hearings are open to the public. There are very tight security measures because, let's face it, everyone accused before that court is either a head of state or a warlord. That the hearings are conducted in full view of the public but behind bulletproof glass.
Really?
Yes.
But firearms are not allowed.
Yes, but of course there will still have to be
Wow,
precautions.
I see.
The but in terms of the process of selection, there is also the equivalent of our own JBC. They have their own committee to review the nominations.
But their process was really transparent. It was effortless to do research on you and your Jordanian competitor or rival.
Competitor, yes.
Yes.
And I would, I would like to state in public that I was happy that I ran against a worthy opponent, and we conducted the campaign, as properly, as gentlemanly as possible. We were both male, which is again part of the balance that has to be maintained there.
There was a third nominee
Yes.
who withdrew from Bangladesh.
The former Chief Justice of Bangladesh.
Oh, that would have been interesting for him to have completed the process.
That is correct. He was initially nominated, and then he withdrew somewhere along the way, early in the process. But one thing unique there, Marita, since you're so familiar with the JBC process in the
Yes.
Philippines, is that the committee came out with a report.
Yes.
In the Philippines, all we have is a ranking. Over there, they have a report evaluating the qualifications, and they were very careful also about the mandate of the committee. They said that we cannot make any evaluation outside the specific mandate.
So that's why I think it's going to be a good model for the JBC, the Judicial and Bar Council, to look into the nomination process for an ICC judge.
Come to think of it, yes, that will be useful.
Okay. Again, back to the Rome Statute. Yeah. Powerful countries like the US, China, India have not. No, US has signed but not ratified. And China and India.
George W. Bush unsigned.
Unsigned.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Why is there this aversion towards the ICC? And does this weaken the ICC because the great powers, the powerful nations, are not part of it?
Well, of course, the ideal is a universality of jurisdiction, that the court will have as wide a reach as possible. Yeah. That is, of course, ideal. So from that standpoint, Marites, not having these big players there is not the ideal situation. And it is my hope that eventually they will come around to joining the court. But I think with 123 ratifications all over the world, they are the ones who are isolated and not those who joined. And a good example is the changing position of the United States vis-a-vis the court. It was signed by Clinton toward the end of his term. It was also signed by Arab at around the same time. Okay. And purely by chance, they were out of office by within 1 month from the signing. But by the time George W. Bush came on board, he says, not only do I not like this court, I'm unsigning.
So it's possible to unsign?
Well, in fact, when Bush did that, that's exactly what people asked. Pwede pala yun?
Oh,
but anyway, yes, indeed. Well, let's put it this way. States have sovereignty. Okay. They sign and unsign. Except that in some agreements, the effect of the unsigning or the procedure for unsigning is spelled out. Okay. Not only that, he said, I will unsign, and any state that signs this treaty should first agree not to prosecute Americans. Oh. He called it the bilateral immunity agreement. Oh. And if you don't sign the BIA, he said, I will withdraw all foreign aid.
So it worked.
The Philippines signed.
Okay. At least
in fact, we signed the bilateral immunity agreement even before we signed the Rome Statute. Anyway.
Was this during Gloria's time? President
yes.
Arroyo's time
yes.
already. Okay.
But just to jump to the end, the good thing is today the U.S. has increasingly voted at the UN Security Council to refer matters to the ICC. In other words, from a position where they were undermining the court, systematically by law, we now face a situation where they realize it is good to have a neutral and independent court to which we can refer disputes. In other words, it provides, in international diplomacy, it provides them an option for a neutral, independent judicial settlement of disputes.
Okay. How about China and India? Is there involvement? I mean, is there none signing? You know, do you think that they will come to it like the U.S. is changing its position gradually? Have you seen signals from these two big countries in our neighborhood?
Well, I am not in a position. I have not followed India and China in terms of ratification of the ICC. I have followed the other states which are closer to ratification. But I think it will eventually get to a stage where those who are, where those who stay away from the ICC will have to, the burden will shift to them to explain why they are.
We have a question, I think, from social media. If there are cases filed that involve the Philippines, will you take part or will you inhibit yourself?
Oh, well, I'm confident I can be impartial, but I think if the rules require that I inhibit, of course I will inhibit. For me, the important thing is that I should be willing to inhibit if my participation in a case will in any way taint the proceedings, either for or against a party. I think that should be a good standard.
Yes.
And so I will be guided by that standard when I face that such a situation.
But are there explicit rules on inhibition? Like here in the Philippines, there are unwritten rules on inhibition, but there are also those that are explicit.
Okay. On this point, I am not sure, but I don't think there is an explicit requirement. I'll give you the contrast to the ICJ, which is a much older institution. There, if there is a case filed before them, and that party has a judge on the court is required to get, they call it a judge ad hoc, a judge nominated by the unrepresented party. But that is because, again, it is state responsibility.
Yes.
In this case, it is individual criminal responsibility. So we don't have a parallel. So as I've said, I don't think there are rules requiring that. But even without those rules, I think the test for a judge should be to recuse himself if his participation will in any way detract from the legitimacy of the verdict that will be rendered by the court.
Yes, I think one difficulty of the ICC, as reports have said, is to go after leaders who are charged. I mean, physically arresting them or getting them to the court. So, for example, can a leader who is charged with, say, heinous crimes go to a country which is not a signatory of the Rome Statute and not be touched from there?
Yes, that is the short answer. Okay, we start from first principles.
Okay.
One of the path-breaking reforms under the ICC was the waiver of head of state immunity. So it is so well settled in international law. The head of state is a representative of the sovereign. No sovereign can ever be, no head of state can be brought to court anywhere. In fact, that was invoked in the Marcos cases before American courts. That for the acts committed while he was head of state, he cannot be held to answer before American courts. So, in the ICC, from the beginning, in the Rome Statute, we said no. We don't recognize head of state immunity here. Because again, by the nature of these offenses, if you say that they are immune, then it sort of undermines the whole setup, that you can prosecute everyone except the Godfather himself.
Exactly.
So that is a starting point. Now, in terms of enforcing it against incumbent heads of state, that is the biggest, the biggest challenge. It is both a political and a practical problem, not just to collect the evidence against him, but also to enforce the warrant of arrest.
Has there ever been an incumbent head of
Yes,
state?
al-Bashir.
Oh yes, that's the recent case.
That is,
he was protected by.
Well, he has visited some states that are members of the Rome Statute and who should have been under a duty, the duty of judicial cooperation, to serve the warrant of arrest. So I think, without going into detail,
Yes.
that case is fully documented in the newspapers, and it
Yes.
demonstrates the difficulty. But again, Marites, you can look at the larger picture. Augusto Pinochet was
Yeah.
for a long time. Well, of course, he was able to return to Chile, but he had that episode where he needed an operation. He
Yes.
went to a country which had an extradition treaty with Spain. He was facing charges before Spanish courts and for human rights violations of Spanish nationals that committed during his dictatorship. So, for me, again, we look at the lessons of history, and the justice, the long arm of justice eventually catches up with that.
So you really look forward to your 6 years.
That is correct.
6 years in The Hague, but you
That
will
is
be
correct.
visiting the Philippines.
I sure hope, as
And what will happen to the Inquirer?
I have been a publisher for more than 2 years at the Inquirer. I have learned a lot from the. It is exciting dealing with journalists. I'm a lawyer, a law professor, talking to a journalist here. It's been fun working with journalists. I have said this in many places, with headstrong editors and reporters who know the challenges that they face, equally equally headstrong. And so for me, it is an experience that I value, that I cherish, and I think I learned a lot about your world, the world of journalists.
It may even help you in your work at the ICC.
Well,
I don't know in what way.
I've got to tell you, it developed a sense, that instinct in me to look at, if I'm watching an event, to ask how will it, whether it will end up on page 1 or whether it will, or what angle will be highlighted.
Do the judges of the ICC, do they meet with the press? Would you know if
in fact, before I left The Hague, I asked the president of the tribunal for permission if I can be.
Oh my
interviewed.
gosh, so you had to go through that.
Yes, because in fact that is one big adjustment for me, Marites. I was I am a law professor. I was a columnist for a long time, and in both capacities, if you're asked any question, you can feel free to answer whichever way you want, and then suddenly I have to face the constraints of the new office I have just assumed. So it's quite an adjustment for me, really, in a very, very real way.
And you will be in a very quiet place, far from the reach of Philippine media.
Not exactly with with Facebook and email,
That's
but
right.
a very quiet place, and that is something I look forward to, actually.
Okay.
Very quiet. I look forward to quiet walks in beautiful parks, and
Which you cannot have in the Philippines.
that is right.
But
Just
I think at
finding
some-
a park is
At some
difficult.
point, you will miss us.
Oh, I already preparing for my leaving for The Hague. I have already begun to miss Manila. I already see the things I will miss when I go.
Anyway, thank you so much, Raul, for spending time with us and for having to go to the process of asking permission to grant this interview. Thank you. And I'm Marites Vitug, and that was Rappler Talk.
My pleasure.